I really think it's essential that you start using your voice.
Mm.
And if you get in trouble, or even if you get kind of your community, actually the truest way to follow Jesus
Mm.
is to stand against systems of oppression.
Okay. 1, 2, ready, go.
Welcome to the Called to Be Bad podcast. My name is Mariah Martin, and I feel called to be bad. It turns out I'm not the only one. Join us as we dig into all things bad, scandalous, deviant, you know, the stuff that makes good church folks squirm in the sanctuary. Why? Well, because sometimes the scandalous is spiritual, deviant is divine, and bad is beautiful. Say yes to the call, and let's see what holy trouble we get into today. Hi, Megan.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. So, this is Meghan Tschanz. Is that how you say your last name?
It's Chauncey, like there's a basketball player called Chauncey Billups. So just like
Okay.
take off the EY at the end, and that's how
Yeah.
you pronounce it.
Meghan Tschanz. Did I say that right?
Yep, you did.
Okay. So Meghan is a writer, a speaker, and a former missionary who's passionate about empowering women and reclaiming feminism for the Christian faith. She's a prolific blogger, host of the Faith and Feminism podcast. I have not listened to that podcast, so I need to check that out. So today we have Meghan here to talk about your new book, which is titled Women Rising: Learning to Listen, Reclaiming Our Voice. But before we begin, I do want to offer a content warning. We'll be talking about topics like sexual violence and sex trafficking. So as usual, take care of yourself, do what you need to do. So yeah, thank you, Meghan, for joining us. And to start our conversation, will you share a little bit about the premise of your book and the missionary programs that you participated in?
Yes. So the premise of my book, that's like such a loaded question, right? To kind of boil it down, it's a memoir of my time working with both sexually exploited and oppressed women. And through working with them, seeing themes of patriarchy play out in their lives, and the same themes of patriarchy play out in my own life, and how that contributed not only to their harm, but also to my harm as well. And having this profound realization that, I was a missionary, the conservative church that I was working with was actually responsible for a lot of these harmful patriarchal teachings that was leading to these women's harm. And so it's my journey of listening to women's stories and then pushing back against power and patriarchy and different systems that harm women. And so it's my story of learning that, quitting my job as a missionary to start a podcast called Faith and Feminism, and to attempt to reclaim feminism for the Christian faith. And of course, probably many of your listeners know that feminism can be a dirty word in Christian spaces, and I want to make it not so, because feminism, I think, is a core tenet of Jesus's teachings. Equality is really important, and so that's my book.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, beloved baddies. A quick break to tell you that this episode is sponsored by the Center for Art, Humor, and Soul, a nonprofit that supports and amplifies the voices of edgewalkers through art that catalyzes change, laughter that brings us together, and soul awakening to the creative spark within us. The support from the Center for Art, Humor, and Soul has meant the world to this podcast. So I highly encourage you to check out their website, arthumorandsoul.com, to see their other featured artists and projects. If you want to support the podcast, you can check out our Patreon or get in touch. Now I'll let you get back to this episode of Called to Be Bad. So I'm curious, and this may be an impossible question, so I understand if you can't answer it, but do you think your understanding of feminism and gender would have been changed if you hadn't have done this like mission work and traveled and talked with all these women?
Yeah, so I don't think that's an impossible question at all. I think it
Okay.
was actually absolutely essential for me, at least, just because the conservative context that I grew up in, I wasn't exposed to any other teaching. So while I was aware of how these teachings made me feel, while I was aware of how it was to exist in the world as a woman, to be a survivor of sexual assault, to be sexually harassed on the regular, I didn't know that it wasn't just me, that this is actually something that's common to all women, whether they live here in the United States or they live, in Southeast Asia or in Africa or any of these other areas that I talk about in my book, that this theme of patriarchy is not just present here. There's different, I mean, it looks different in different places, but it's present everywhere. And I think for me, I think I never would have spoke up or learned how to speak up if I thought it was just affecting me, because the teaching I was taught is, kind of just suck it up. Like, this is your role as a woman to serve. It feels unnatural because women are selfish or something like that. And not realizing, wait a second, this is not just bad teaching that just affects me. This actually has drastic ramifications, not only for me and women like me, but for women around the globe. And so I don't think I would have realized that unless I had seen story after story after story of these patriarchal gender roles leading to extreme abuse and harm of women.
Yeah. And you tell some incredible stories in your book. I had to I read some of it last night and I went to bed so angry. I think in the best way, like an anger that was driven by compassion and love for these women, and rage at the ways that they have been treated. And there's one part of your book that keeps standing out to me, and it's this letter or this email that you wrote to someone, and you were appealing to him to like help you help these women. And he came back with a pretty scathing response, or kind of corrective of the ways you were thinking of these women. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
So I hope people read this book and it's I don't want to say it's scathing, but it's very it's needed, but it's like very confrontational to the way that I was raised. So to give a little context, the email is about white saviorism. He's addressing white saviorism in me. And this is back in 2012 when I had never heard that concept. And certainly the people that I had been taught and, trained by had never brought up that concept at all. But to kind of give the backstory there, I was about 4 months into this missions program that I did, where we traveled to different countries doing mission work with different contacts. So either a pastor or a local ministry leader. And so we were partnered with them. And I, the first month I was encountering a ton of sexism that I was on the receiving end of. And then several months later, I was in Kenya and women were sharing stories. I should say girls, they were underage, were sharing their stories of surviving not only sexual violence and rape, but also female genital mutilation. And I think those stories made me feel really powerless. Like, how can this happen? Why is this happening? This is not okay. And so the next month, when I had women telling me that they were survivors of domestic violence and that a lot of them were encountering domestic violence in this village, I wanted to do something.
Right.
Because I'm like, this is all I've been trained for, is like this kind of idea that the whole premise of missions is like, we have the good news and we can change people's lives with the good news, without realizing or even asking questions of people in that society. And so long story short, women were telling me that they were being beaten essentially by men in the village. And I felt deeply in my bones that this was wrong and I wanted to do something about it. And so I was put in touch with a founder of this organization. So I asked him, like, in a not good way, how can I help these women? And he responded with an email back calling out so much of my white saviors. You're not their savior. Why do you think you can fix these longstanding problems in the matter of 3 weeks? Do you want to spend like many years here learning the language, learning the cultures, and really actually listening to these women's stories and what they need, instead of just coming in with a solution with little to no information of what the actual problem was. I saw the symptom, domestic violence, but the cause is patriarchy, right? So domestic violence is, I mean, there's a lot of studies coming out recently that violence, sexual violence is actually caused by power differentials and power inequity. But the point is, like, he was such a foundational part of learning my white saviorism in a way that I wasn't even aware of white saviorism was. And it was a process that took me a long time to learn. At the same time, I don't think I was even that dedicated to trying to unlearn this because I still don't understand systemic injustice at that point. But yeah, so he and I had these corresponding emails, and he was the first one that had me really question, is what I'm doing helpful? Is the way I'm thinking helpful? Is it elitist? Is it white supremacist? And the answer to those questions, a lot of them, yeah, this is something that you need to work out. And so I spend the next couple of chapters painfully and slowly learning that. But I tell those stories because I hope that people can learn from my mistakes and learn from the ways that I have failed. And that, I think a lot of us, when we make mistakes, are like, I give up, like, I'm bad, I can't do better. But I think the whole process of being a human is to get better and to learn. There's an incredible quote by Maya Angelou that says, do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. Yeah. And that's my, like, keep going. You will make mistakes, but that doesn't mean we don't give up. We just give up.
I really appreciated how you didn't get defensive after receiving that email, with all those correctives and teaching you about white saviorism. You didn't get defensive. You were open and you learned and you really did better after you knew better. And so I just want to commend you on that, because some people would have dug in their heels and been like, no, like, I can fix this systemic complicated issue with 3 weeks of, being in this place. Like, I do know better. So yeah, I just really appreciated how you kind of demonstrated with vulnerability and honesty how you needed to unlearn all of this kind of white supremacist view of missions work. On the note of white supremacy, can I read a quote from your book about that? When I, without a divinity degree or speaking skills, was handed the mic to give sermons because of the color of my skin, that was white supremacy. When I was celebrated because of the color of my skin, that was white supremacy. When I thought I could solve complex problems in a month or so, even though I had no formal training, that was white supremacy. So will you say a little bit more about the connections between missions and white supremacy? And can you actually define the white savior mentality?
To answer your question, I think to talk about white saviorism, like, I can obviously talk about how I was perpetuating this idea, but the concept doesn't come from me. There's actually a lot of anti-racist activists that talk about this. One of my favorite, which I also mentioned in the book, her name is Layla F. Saad. She wrote a book called Me and White Supremacy, and she has an incredible definition of what white saviorism is. It's basically this idea that white people are better, inherently better, and thus can fix the problem of people of color, and that people of color need white people to fix their problems. Right. And so this idea, I mean, let's talk about missions for a second. This whole idea that I have something you need, and I'm not going to spend time learning or listening to what you need, because, like, who knows their own needs best? Probably the person, right? Like, if you come to me and say, hey, I really think you need these shoes, I'm like, well, I actually don't need shoes, but thank you. Like, this whole concept that we need to listen before we can help. And do they even want our help? And is our help actually hurting? I think what we should be doing different in missions, if we're going to continue to do missions, is to let locals lead, and we're a supporting force, like, let me support you, your community best. And another aspect of this where I talk about this in the book, I talk about female genital mutilation. It's like, I thought, well, at this point, I was just shocked and appalled that it was happening. But if you're looking at who is making the biggest difference in these areas, it's people of their own community that are already making huge strides. And so if I was, truly upset by this. And I was, but at the time I didn't know that there were so many local women who were survivors of this procedure, making huge strides and differences. And so if I really wanted to help, my role was to be a supporter, not someone starting off this new thing. And so missions, I think, I talk about this in the end of the book, but we need to even start to do, before we send out missionaries, to do some research on how missions have been used historically. And like that history is not good. It's bloody, it's dirty, it's messy. And so if we, fast forward to like the missions that I did, like I wasn't going there and stealing people's land, though that was what people did in the past. I wasn't killing anyone. That was my history, though. What I was doing is coming with this concept of, I know better than you. I am here to help you, without understanding and realizing, say, maybe I am going to an impoverished community, but that community very well could be impoverished because of colonialism. And so I think I'm here to help fix the problem, but I'm not even realizing that this is a problem that was created by my people. And on top of that, that it's being continued with our global policies. Like, for example, we have a lot of people go to Latin America for missions work without realizing that the United States has been the most unstabilizing forces in Latin America because of our policies and how we interact with people. And so I think it's this whole idea of we're always the good guys, without looking at how our hands might be bloody. And if we look at scripture and we look at the book of Isaiah, and it says, I don't want to hear your celebrations or your praises or any of these things until you washed your bloody hands. But the truth was, the system that I was part of, this white supremacist idea that white people are better, that we're more equipped, that we're out to save people, was actually driving the oppression of a lot of these people. So it was this idea of white supremacy and patriarchy. So I was also part of a patriarchal culture that taught women were supposed to submit, women weren't supposed to speak, women weren't supposed to lead, really creating enormous power differentials between men and women. That also was largely responsible. And so for me, unlearning white saviorism and unlearning white supremacy and unlearning patriarchy is all about, like, this is how I actually help in the world, is by stop supporting systems that are harming people. And so that's one of the big reasons I wrote the book. How many Christian churches send thousands and thousands of dollars to support anti-trafficking organizations? And I'm not saying that's bad. What I am saying is you're trying to support, you're just fixing the symptom when the cause is patriarchy. And so we need to address patriarchy in our own pews. We need to address biblical gender roles in our own pews. We can look at our own churches and see that how many stories of sexual abuse and assault are happening. Well, this is due to the way we view women and the way we view men and the way we pigeonhole them in certain roles and tell men that they're supposed to be dominant and women that they're supposed to be submissive. This is absolutely has to do with the way we think and the systems we support. And so for me, learning that I was part of the problem, but I was complicit in the problem I was trying to fix, is 100% essential. And you only learn that through listening to people who have been marginalized.
I'm really fascinated by the ways that you explore your kind of desire to feel good. When I was growing up, there was definitely this idea that being a missionary was kind of the way to prove that you were a good person and a good Christian. How have you reconciled this desire to be good or thought of as good with all that you have learned?
Yeah, that's such a heavy question. And I think so many people ask this question. Like, if we look at all of the wars of all of history, both people thought they're on the right side. They both thought they were good. And growing up in the context I did, the kind of theology I was taught was this kind of, oh my gosh, I forgot the term for it, but this whole idea of that humans are like the worst thing
total
ever.
Depravity.
Yes, total depravity. Yes. That humans are like the worst thing ever. And we're so sinful and terrible. And the only thing that makes us kind of good is Jesus. So Jesus is actually this, like, God is just like this massive narcissist that only loves Jesus in us and like kind of hates anything that makes us different, that makes us us, like, the fact that I'm a woman or I'm outspoken or that I really like, mangoes or whatever, the things that like make me me. I thought, the quote that we always hear is like, more of God, less of me. And I think that is such a misunderstanding of what Paul was talking about in that passage. But more than that, I think more of God means more of us, because it says that in the Bible that, God knit us together in our mother's womb. And I feel like God was intentional making us the way that we are. But we kind of have this theology that we've been taught that we're bad and we need to deny our emotions, we need to deny our feelings, we need to deny, and just be more like Christ. But what I found when I tried to be deny, that I was actually being a lot less of a nice or kind person, right? Because I'm not dealing with my pain, I'm not dealing with my sorrow, I'm not dealing with my grief, I'm spiritually bypassing everything. I'm completely not self-aware, like, because I think the blood of Jesus covers everything, and because I'm just denying everything about myself, that's going to make me a better Christian. And so I grew up with this theology of like, I kind of thought I was just terrible, and I had, some really rough up like things that happened to me in childhood, and I thought that was proof that I was bad. Like, these bad things that happened to me are proof that I am bad. And so I wanted to be good so desperately. I wanted to be loved. I wanted to be valued so desperately. This is just a human need. But we've been told that we're bad. And so we try to be good without realizing that maybe we're already good. And so what I learned through my process is, that is why I went into missions. It's because, number one, I was a woman, and that was the only avenue available to me, because I couldn't be a pastor, and I couldn't be a teacher, and I couldn't be all of these things. And so, like, the best thing I can be is a missionary or a pastor's wife. But I still really struggled with the whole idea of, like, the way that I was taught biblical womanhood was basically I don't, like, just serve my husband, deny myself, be sexually available to him, take care of the home. And that just, I didn't feel like that was for me. But the thing I was finding is that, like, no amount of affirmation could make me feel loved, because inherently I thought something was broken with me. But I had this realization actually on the mission field where I actually saw a man purchase a young girl, and I have always had quite a bit of anger for Johns, and I think that's justified. I never understood them. I didn't know how you could justify buying someone that was trafficked. I didn't, like, I was just so angry at them. But I remember when I was watching this guy with this much younger woman, and she went up to go buy them some alcoholic drinks, and he was standing there, and I was watching him, and I just saw that he looked super insecure, super nervous. And the longer I looked at him, I saw myself in him as someone that was just really hungry for affirmation or wanting to be loved. And it was this terrible realization to see something common in our humanity between this guy who I viewed as just the worst of the worst and me. And it was through that moment that I realized the root of my sin, or the root of when I have harmed other people, has not been due, as I was taught, to a tremendous amount of pride. The root of my sin, or when I screwed up, was actually not understanding that I was good, that I was loved. It says in the Bible that perfect love casts out fear. And I had so much fear that I wasn't loved. And it also says in the Bible that nothing can separate us from the love of God. Neither angels nor demons, like, all of these things cannot separate us from the love of God. But I didn't understand that I was loved. So I tried to prove it over and over again. And it was through seeing this guy and realizing, wait, maybe the problem is that we're so hungry for love that we're greedily snatching for it, instead of realizing that we have everything we need already. I am already loved. He is already loved. He doesn't need to prove his masculinity by buying a young woman. And I don't need to prove who I am by doing missions. I felt like God said, like, you are loved and nothing can change that. And you don't need to prove it anymore. And it was this, honestly, this cosmic shift in the way I viewed the world. I was no longer set out to prove that I was good. I realized I was good, and I could make mistakes, and I could be sinful, but that didn't intrinsically change the way God felt about me or the way others felt about me. Like, I could be both a very good person, a good creation, and make mistakes.
And to go a little bit into talking more about sex trafficking,
Mm-hmm.
you said that sex trafficking doesn't begin with being bought and sold. It begins in childhood. It begins with the way we raise our families. Will you explain this quote a bit
Mm-hmm.
further?
Absolutely. So again, I think we are trained, at least in American culture and white American culture, to look at issues as like we're looking at the symptoms and we're not actually getting to the root. There's a quote by Nelson Mandela that says like, why do we keep pulling people out of the river instead of asking why they're falling in the river in the first place? And I think this kind of shift in mentality is so important for us. So again, a lot of anti-trafficking organizations, and this is not a bad thing. Like the one I partnered with, the one that I love, is they took, they gave girls an opportunity to go through college. And that was great because they were helping women who are already there get through college. But the problem was that these women were so quickly replaced. And there's still so much violence towards women, even if we help we have domestic violence shelters. That's so important. That's needed. But we're not asking, why are so many women being beaten in the first place? And so the whole concept I want to illustrate again is like the way we raise our families. So here in the context I was grown up in, women were less. That was just a simple fact. Women were there to serve the needs of the man. We are there to be sexually available to them, to be sexually pure for them until we met them. And then we weren't allowed to teach or lead or preach. And so all of these ideas, yes, it's harmful for women to be raised with that idea, but I think it's so harmful for men as well, because what do you think as a young boy growing up, that the girls around you are there to serve you, that you're supposed to lead them, that they're supposed to listen to you no matter what, that you're closer to God, like you're kind of going to be their mouthpiece for God because they're not capable? Of course you're going to think there's something less than you, because you have been told that you deserve all of the power. You deserve women to serve you. Of course you're going to think, well, women are less than me. And we can even look, this is, present in the church, but it's also present in culture. You throw like a girl, you're a sissy, you're a pussy, all of these different things where being a woman is bad.
Right.
Like woman is an insult. And when you think people are less than human, that justifies so much violence towards them. So, if we look at any kind of genocide ever, that's how it started. Women are less, or people are less. And so this violence that I'm perpetuating against them is justified.
Right.
So why is it that we live in the United States in a society that 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted or the survivors of domestic violence? Why do we live in a society that between 1 in 5 and 1 in 6 are raped? Why do we live in a society that only 5 in 1,000 rapists face jail time? Oh, this is because of the way we raise our young boys to think that they're entitled and should be entitled to the bodies of women.
Right.
This has to do with men having to always be in control. Again, we talked earlier about how sexual assault is due to power differentials. It's not due to sexual feelings. There's so many studies that support this, but this whole idea that your consent doesn't matter, so I'm going to take what's entitled to me. Why do we hear stories of pastors abusing congregants or professors and students? And it's always these power differentials that we're seeing. So when we're talking about sex trafficking, this idea that men are entitled to sex,
Right.
and if I don't get sex from a woman in an equal partnership with consent, I'm going to buy a woman. This is not to say, I hit my mic. This is not to say that all women in the sex trade are trafficked, but a good portion of them are. I'm going to go take it from someone where she has to do what I say. And I saw this so clearly, so very clearly when I was working in the Philippines, and I was talking to a man, and I was asking him, or my group was asking him, why are you here? And he said that he was there buying trafficked women because in the United States, women are too uppity, and women here in the Philippines are raised right. They know how to respect men. He literally said he went to go buy trafficked women because these women know how to respect men. And as he was talking, I realized that he sounded so much like the pastors I had grown up with. When I say this doesn't start with like rescuing women, this starts with the way we raise our sons and daughters to view women as whole people. And for young women to know that they are whole people. And for young boys to know women are whole people and that you're not entitled to their bodies and that consent matters. A lot of men are doing this. A lot of men are responsible for this. And some of them may not even be aware of it being assault because they've just been raised that this is something they're entitled to. So that's what I mean by that quote.
And you talked about how it's in our culture too, like in our films, like this trope of the damsel in distress, that women need to be rescued by men. And then you had this line, and I think my jaw dropped. Women wouldn't need to be rescued if men stopped harming them. And I was like, right. If women are in danger, more often than not, it's from men. And so like, we're teaching men to rescue women from other men, like instead of attacking the root problem, which is like this male entitlement that like comes from the church. Do you see ways in the church that this is kind of shifting these gender dynamics, these gender roles? And what are ways that you could see the church push even farther against this complementarianism?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I haven't had the best experience with the church in talking about this. I, have been definitely pushed to the margins of the Christian community. I've been told more times than I can count that I can't be a Christian and a feminist, which again, I can back up scripturally all the live long day about how actually I don't think you can be Christian and not feminist, but regardless.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. So unfortunately, the church hasn't responded well. I've felt immeasurable amount of hurt from the church in this process. See a therapist about it because I felt so much church betrayal. Like I gave my life to this institution, and to feel like you don't value me as a woman or people of color or anything else, like that has been felt very betraying because it is not what Jesus preached. I do have some hope that we are starting to have these conversations. The fact that like there's people like you that will have me on the podcast, the fact that I can make a podcast called Faith and Feminism. And I think we're seeing this massive upheaval in the church right now. A new study came out that church attendance for the first time since it's been recorded is under 50% for the United States. And that doesn't surprise me. And you know what? That doesn't even make me sad because I think people are leaving an institution that's causing harm. And I think that's a good thing. For me, like I had to leave harmful institutions. But that doesn't mean I like lost my faith in God. But like, okay, well, if you don't want me to be here, then I will go elsewhere. I will find a way. I will make, there's, it talks in the Bible about making streams in the desert, making a way where there was no way. And I love that. I think the church is shifting to make a way where there wasn't a way. I'm really proud of people like Beth Moore who are leaving racist and sexist institutions like the SBC. I think we're going to continue to see more of that. And so for all of that gives me hope. A lot of people will be like, oh, this is a bad thing. This is a sad thing. I think it's a good thing because we are differentiating the gospel of Jesus, a gospel of justice, from a system that is upholding injustice.
I want to read this last quote from towards the end of your book. To every single one of us who has been told to submit, to stay silent, to go home, to shut up, to cover up, to be small, to be seen and not heard, to every woman who has had her consent or her body violated, to every woman who was told her worth was in how she looked and not the merit of her character, I see you. So beautiful. So what advice do you have for any woman trying to find her voice?
Number one is to find that you're not alone. Because what happened to me when I realized I wasn't alone, that what I had experienced was not just my experience, that this is something that is happening to women all over the place, and they're asking questions all over the place. That was incredibly empowering to me. And so I'd say, number one, find someone you can talk to about this. I also see a therapist. So if you're not seeing a therapist, I highly recommend it. I know it is unattainable for some people due to cost, but if you are able to afford it, I would try and make room for your budget to see a therapist. It's been really helpful for me. Once those two needs are met and you're having these conversations and you have the support system you need, I really think it's essential that you start using your voice. Because even if you get in trouble, or even if you get kind of kicked out of your community, I think it's actually the truest way to follow Jesus is to stand against systems of oppression. And our voices are so important. I think we've been raised to believe that especially as women, that our voices are unimportant, or something I was raised with, it was sinful for me to speak up as a woman. But I think we really need to push through that and like even look at stories of the Bible of how many times women spoke up and disobeyed. Like if we're looking at stories of women in the Bible, why did they get in the Bible? Because they're breaking with some kind of patriarchal norm and saying, no, like Esther, I'm going to disobey you, my husband, because I need to save a race of people, or stop a genocide, or a Shipra and Puah who ignored the orders of Pharaoh, or Mary Magdalene that sat at the feet of Jesus, breaking every gender norm that there was. When we look at the story of women in the Bible, why do they get mentioned? Because they're breaking with that harmful stuff. And so I'd say the truest way to live out our faith is to start challenging systems that harm other people, and to use our voice and to know that our voice is powerful.
We have a tradition on the podcast to end our time with our blessing. So is it okay if I bless you? And
absolutely, yeah.
Meghan and all of the listeners and viewers of the podcast, may you go this week empowered to lift up your voice, to no longer be silent, to step into your power, and also to be a listening ear, to listen and learn, and when you know better, to do better. So may you go with joy and a loud voice. So, amen.
Amen.
That's all for this episode of Called to Be Bad. Keep being your bad, beautiful selves, and I will see you next time.